Imagine for a moment that you are holding a book.
Right.
It is a completely unique object, bound in soft, um, centuries-old calfskin. And as you open it, you see pages filled with an elegant flowing script that looks incredibly familiar.
It looks like something you could read if you just squinted hard enough.
Exactly. But you cannot read it.
Yeah.
Nobody can. You turn the page, and you are confronted with illustrations of plants that simply do not exist on Earth. You see stars mapped into constellations that match no known sky in these intricate, bizarre networks of plumbing.
It is a profound mystery.
It really is. You are essentially holding a manuscript that has successfully defeated the greatest military code breakers of World War II, the most advanced artificial intelligence supercomputers of the modern era, and, well, centuries of brilliant linguists.
And that is exactly what we are looking at today.
Yes. Welcome. You are joining us for a custom-tailored, comprehensive exploration of what is universally considered the world's most mysterious manuscript. Our mission today is to trace the precise biography of this unreadable 15th century codex.
We are going to chart its remarkable journey.
We are. From the exact physical circumstances of its creation, through the eccentric courts of European emperors, and the hidden laboratories of esoteric alchemists, right up to the present day. Because, advanced technological scans and modern computational decipherment claims are still grappling with its secrets.
And the material we have compiled for you is essentially a vast historical and scientific compendium. We will be analyzing complex codicology, rigorous statistical text analysis, numerous authorship hypotheses, and a very long, fascinating history of cryptographic failures.
It is a lot to cover.
It is a remarkable corpus of data to synthesize for you. I mean, we're looking at an artifact that has successfully resisted every single analytical tool human intelligence has devised over the last 6 centuries.
Which is staggering to think about.
To truly understand the magnitude of this mystery, we have to approach it systematically. We need to start from the physical object itself and move outward into the abstract realm of its text and history.
I think we need an analogy to set the stage for you, just to help you understand the psychological grip this object has on the people who study it.
That is a good idea.
Imagine a heavily reinforced, locked safe discovered at the bottom of the ocean. Every single person who brings it to the surface and examines the complex lock is absolutely convinced that they, and they alone, possess the exact key required to open it.
Right. They are certain of it.
They insert their key, they apply pressure, they explain their brilliant methodology to the world, and yet the lock simply refuses to turn. The safe remains sealed.
That is the exact scenario we are dealing with regarding this manuscript. But before anyone can attempt to read a book, one must first look at what the physical object itself is made of.
Because the tangible materials hold the very first clues to his biography.
Exactly. That brings us into the domain of codicology, which is the rigorous scientific study of books as physical objects. For decades, the actual age of this manuscript was a subject of intense, unresolved debate among historians.
Some believed it was a 13th century artifact, right?
Yes, and others insisted it was a modern forgery. But that ambiguity changed fundamentally and permanently in 2009. Researchers at the University of Arizona conducted rigorous radiocarbon dating on samples taken from various parts of the manuscript's vellum pages.
And for those who might not be familiar with the exact mechanics, radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon-14 isotopes to determine the age of organic materials.
That is correct.
When a living organism dies, in this case, the animal whose skin was used to make the pages, it stops absorbing carbon-14, and the existing isotopes decay at a known, predictable rate.
Precisely. So the researchers extracted tiny margins of the vellum. They carefully avoided any areas with ink or later contamination, and they subjected them to accelerator mass spectrometry.
Wow. Okay.
The results across all tested samples were highly consistent. They placed the creation of the parchment strictly and undeniably between the years 1404 and 1438.
So we have a very firm timeline for the physical book, and later protein testing conducted in 2014 confirmed that this parchment was specifically made from calfskin.
Right. And here's where the material reality of the object becomes incredibly important for you to understand. Producing vellum in the early 15th century was an exceptionally labor-intensive and costly process.
It wasn't just paper.
Far from it. It required soaking the skins in lime vats for days. Then you had to scrape away the hair and flesh with specialized curved knives, and finally stretch the skins incredibly tight on wooden frames while they dried.
To create the roughly 240 surviving pages of this specific codex, researchers calculate it required at least 14 or 15 entire calfskins.
which is a massive amount. In the early 15th century, the sheer material cost of that amount of vellum was substantial. It represented a massive financial investment.
Which immediately prompts a critical historical evaluation, right?
Right.
Because the high cost suggests a project of significant importance.
It does. However, the codicological data presents a fascinating contradiction.
Wait, hold on. This is where I need to present some serious pushback based on the sources.
Right.
If a patron or scholar is spending a small fortune on 15 entire calfskins, you would expect a flawless final product. But the sources indicate that the overall quality of this parchment is actually quite average, maybe even mediocre.
It definitely has flaws.
It contains obvious deficiencies, naturally occurring holes, insect bites, and literal scabs that the scribe simply wrote around.
Yes, they just routed the text right around the damage.
Furthermore, it completely lacks luxurious embellishments, like gold leaf or fine illumination. If you are buying a luxury car, you do not accept scratched paint. Why would someone invest the massive capital required for that much material to execute such an elaborate, highly systematic project, but then settle for average, damaged parchment?
That specific contradiction is precisely what informs our understanding of the book's intended purpose. What is fascinating here is the analysis provided by the prominent medievalist Lisa Fagan Davis.
What did she find?
She physically examined the manuscript and observed that the texture of the parchment is notably soft and pliable. In the context of medieval manuscript preservation, that specific softness is a definitive marker of a book that has been heavily thumbed.
Heavily thumbed, meaning it was used constantly.
Exactly. This implies that the manuscript was absolutely not a ceremonial, pristine object meant to be locked away in a patron's chest or displayed prominently on a church lectern.
So it was working material.
It strongly suggests a workmanlike manual. It was a document that was routinely handled, consulted, and utilized in a practical setting.
That makes sense. The presence of holes and the absence of gold leaf align perfectly with this utilitarian function. It was a tool, not a treasure.
So we have a heavily used, incredibly expensive, yet physically imperfect tool. That brings us to the actual materials used to mark these pages. We have to examine the chemistry of the ink and the paint.
Modern scientific analysis has been meticulously applied to these materials, utilizing polarized light microscopy and energy-dispersive X-ray spectroscopy.
These techniques are crucial because they are non-destructive.
Right. They allow researchers to analyze the precise elemental composition of the materials by measuring how they interact with different wavelengths of light and X-rays without needing to physically scrape off or destroy any part of the historical artifact.
The analysis determined that the intricate outlines of all the figures, the plants, and the entirety of the text itself were executed using a traditional quill pen and iron gall ink.
Iron gall ink was the standard writing and drawing ink in Europe during this period. It is created by combining tannic acids extracted from oak galls with iron sulfate and a binder like gum arabic.
And what the X-ray spectroscopy revealed in 2009 was that the inks contained major amounts of carbon, iron, sulfur, potassium, and calcium, with occasional trace amounts of copper and zinc.
Notably, there was no lead detected.
Which is an important detail. The spectroscopic similarity between the ink used for the illustrative outlines and the ink used for the complex text strongly suggests a contemporaneous origin.
Meaning they were put down at the same time.
They were laid down at the same time, likely by the same hands, during the initial creation phase of the manuscript. However, the application of the colored paint tells a completely different chronological story.
The sources emphasize that the paint was applied somewhat crudely. It frequently bleeds over the finely drawn ink outlines, and it was almost certainly added at a later date.
We can even break down the specific chemical compositions of those pigments for you, which were also identified through that non-destructive microscopy.
The blue paint is composed of ground azurite with traces of the copper oxide cuprite. The white paint is likely a simple mixture of egg white and calcium carbonate.
The green paint is tentatively characterized by copper and copper chlorine resonate. And finally, the red-brown paint indicates a red ochre containing hematite and iron sulfide.
The crucial observation for you regarding these pigments is that they were entirely inexpensive common materials for the 15th century.
They were the standard, accessible pigments of a working artisan. We are not talking about rare lapis lazuli or finely ground minerals associated with high-end medieval illumination.
To return to an analogy, looking at these pages is comparable to an artist creating a highly detailed, beautifully rendered black and white comic book, which a child later discovers and aggressively colors in using a set of cheap wax crayons.
That is a very apt comparison. The precision of the original line work is completely at odds with the imprecise, almost sloppy application of the subsequent colors. It suggests the book had multiple lives.
Furthermore, there is direct physical evidence of later alterations to the text itself.
Yes, computer scientist Jorge Stolfi from the University of Campinas conducted exhaustive visual analyses highlighting that specific parts of the text and drawings have been explicitly modified.
What kind of modifications?
You can observe darker ink applied directly over an earlier, fainter script across various folios. This retouching process indicates that the manuscript was an active, living document.
Right. It was subject to revision or restoration by later handlers who were tracing over faded sections to preserve the information.
Knowing the physical age of the vellum and the chemical makeup of the inks, we must now transition from the materials to the actual writing on these heavily thumbed pages.
We are looking at a script that fundamentally defies all known linguistic conventions. We are examining the anatomy of the unreadable.
The scope of the script is mathematically extensive. The manuscript contains roughly 38,000 words. Of those, approximately 9,000 are entirely unique word forms.
The text is written consistently from left to right, matching European conventions. However, there is no obvious or standard punctuation anywhere in the document.
No periods, no commas, no capitalization to indicate the beginning of a sentence.
The vast majority of the individual characters are constructed using very simple, continuous one- or two-stroke pen marks.
And the physical execution of this writing is absolutely critical to understanding the mystery. The paleographic sources describe it as having a smooth ductus.
And for you listening, in the study of historical handwriting, ductus refers to the speed, flow, and direction of the strokes used to create letters.
Exactly. The text here flows naturally with an easy, highly practiced rhythm.
It completely lacks the hesitations, the uneven spacing, or the cognitive delays that you would normally expect to see when a person is painstakingly transcribing a complex mathematical code.
Or writing haltingly in an unfamiliar, newly invented cipher. The visual evidence strongly suggests absolute fluency. The author, or authors, were highly practiced in executing these specific character shapes.
They wrote this unknown script as naturally as you or I would write our native language.
This brings us to another major paleographic breakthrough, again provided by the meticulous research of Lisa Fagan Davis. She conducted an exhaustive analysis of the individual scribal hands present in the manuscript.
By carefully tracking minuscule, almost subconscious variations in how certain characters were formed, such as the presence of slightly larger or smaller loops,
or straighter or curvier crossbars, and the varying angles of the vertical feet on specific glyphs.
she discovered a distinct, undeniable pattern.
She found that these tiny stylistic variations occurred between entirely different sections of the book, but they remained remarkably consistent within those specific sections.
This indicates that the variations are not the result of a single scribe slowly changing their handwriting style over years of work, right?
Exactly. It is the concrete evidence of distinct individuals. Davis concluded, based on these distinct handwriting profiles, that the manuscript was written by 5 different scribes.
I have to interject with a fundamental question regarding that specific finding, because it seems to change everything.
It does.
If we accept the paleographic evidence of 5 separate scribes, how could a community of 5 different people all fluently write in a completely unknown, seemingly unreadable script?
That is the core question.
If multiple individuals shared this exact writing system, doesn't this completely rule out the popular, romanticized theory that the manuscript was the product of a lone, perhaps unwell mind inventing a private language in isolation?
It absolutely dismantles the lone madman hypothesis. The undeniable presence of 5 distinct scribes suggests a highly coordinated effort, a shared lexicon, or a common training method.
It indicates a project with a defined community, however small or secretive that community may have been.
They all understood the rules of this system. And if we connect this to the statistical properties of the text itself, the mystery deepens significantly because the text behaves in ways that are deeply contradictory.
The statistical quirks are where the internal structure of this text separates itself from random gibberish. You need to understand how the text obeys something called Zipf's law.
In quantitative linguistics, Zipf's law states that given a large sample of natural language, the frequency of any word is inversely proportional to its rank in the frequency table.
Simply put, the most frequent word in a language appears roughly twice as often as the second most frequent word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on.
If you look at English, the word the is the most common, followed by and they follow this exact mathematical curve.
This specific mathematical distribution is a definitive hallmark of naturally occurring human languages, and the text in this unreadable manuscript strictly adheres to Zipf's law.
However, while it perfectly obeys that fundamental law of natural language, it violates other linguistic rules dramatically.
How so?
Linguists Claire Bowern and Luke Lindemann applied advanced statistical methods to measure the predictability of the character sequences within the words. They used a mathematical metric known as second-order conditional entropy, often denoted as H2.
To understand entropy in this context, think of it as a measure of predictability. In natural human languages, the H2 metric generally falls between 3 and 4.
The text in this manuscript possesses an incredibly low H2 metric of approximately 2.
I want to break down exactly what that means for you. Think of entropy in language like playing a game where you have to guess the next letter in a word.
That is a good way to frame it.
In English, if you see the letter Q, you are almost 100% certain that the next letter will be a U. That high predictability lowers the entropy for that specific sequence.
But generally, English is quite flexible, so the overall entropy is higher. The incredibly low entropy of this manuscript means the text is highly predictable at the character level.
The sequence of letters is far more rigid than in English, Latin, or any standard European language. Practically no words have fewer than 2 letters or more than 10.
The internal rules governing word structure are remarkably strict. Certain characters only ever appear at the very beginnings of words.
Other characters only appear at the very end of words.
And a specific set of shapes is restricted entirely to the middle. Professor Gonzalo Rubio noted a crucial comparative point here.
What was his observation?
In known Indo-European languages, grammatical markers like adding an "es" for plural or an "ed" for past tense never appear exclusively in the dead center of words.
Yet the unreadable text is morphologically complex. It appears to have a highly structured, rigid system of prefixes, roots, and suffixes that absolutely dictate these inflexible character placements.
Furthermore, the rigorous statistical analysis revealed the existence of 2 distinct dialects or encoding methods within the book, which scholars conventionally refer to as Voynich A and Voynich B.
Voynich A is found predominantly in the herbal and pharmaceutical sections of the codex.
While Voynich B appears in the balneological, astrological, and certain other medical sections, the most common vocabulary items differ substantially between these 2 variants.
Topic modeling and statistical tracking suggest that different scribes may have been assigned to specific topical sections of the book, utilizing these slightly different dialects or encoding rules based on the subject matter.
Amidst all of this unidentified, mathematically rigid script, there are extremely rare, jarring instances of extraneous, recognizable writing.
For example, on page 119, there is a very small High German phrase, der Musteil, which translates historically to a widow's share.
In the astrological section, there are names of 10 months written in a recognizable Latin script with a unique spelling that strongly suggests the medieval Romance languages of France, northwest Italy, or the Iberian Peninsula.
And on the final page, folio 116 verso, there are 4 lines written in a heavily distorted Latin script that scholars refer to as Mictonese.
The lettering superficially resembles late 14th and 15th century European alphabets, but the words themselves do not appear to form logical sense in any known language.
They appear uniquely distorted, adopting certain visual characteristics of the unknown manuscript language itself.
It remains an unresolved debate whether these Latin script editions were part of the original composition by the 5 scribes, or if they were added as marginalia by later owners trying to make sense of the book.
Since the primary text cannot be read by anyone, scholars and researchers are forced to categorize the manuscript based on its surreal, almost alien illustrations.
This brings us to a bizarre visual taxonomy.
The codex is conventionally divided into 6 distinct sections, based purely on the thematic content of the drawings. Let's walk through what these pages actually look like.
The largest section is the herbal, spanning approximately 126 pages. Each page typically displays 1 or 2 large plant drawings, accompanied by dense paragraphs of text.
In terms of layout, this format is entirely standard for European instructional herbals of the 15th century.
However, the botanical reality depicted is unambiguously unidentifiable. The plants appear to be composite illustrations, chimerical creations.
You will consistently observe the intricate, fibrous roots of one known botanical species physically attached to the distinct, serrated leaves of a completely different species.
Which is then capped with the vivid flowers of a third, entirely unrelated plant.
It is as if someone took pieces of real plants and stitched them together into impossible hybrids.
Then we move to the astronomical section, which comprises 17 pages of highly complex circular diagrams.
These pages feature traditional zodiac symbols that you would recognize, but they are populated by concentric rings of female figures.
Many of whom are holding stars tethered directly to their arms by long, drawn cords.
Next is the balneological section, spanning 20 pages. Here, we must carefully observe the visual data with its strictly clinical and academic tone.
The imagery consists of dense, continuous text interspersed with depictions of unclothed female figures.
These figures are systematically interacting with elaborate, interconnected networks of tubes, conduits, pools, and flowing fluids.
The design is highly integrated. The representation of fluid dynamics and these complex plumbing structures continuously flows from one folio page directly to the next, suggesting a continuous, systematic process.
Following that, we reach the cosmological section, utilizing 14 pages, many of which are complex, fragile foldouts.
The most prominent and widely studied is the Rosette's folio, which spans 6 contiguous pages when fully unfolded.
It depicts a vast, interconnected map or diagram featuring 9 large circular rosettes or islands.
These circular structures are linked by intricate structural causeways and contain architectural elements resembling medieval castles, alongside strange geological formations.
Including a structure that is frequently interpreted by modern scholars as a volcano.
Finally, we have the pharmaceutical section and the recipes section. The pharmaceutical pages feature hundreds of small, isolated plant parts, roots, leaves, and stems,
drawn next to objects resembling highly ornate apothecary jars.
The recipes section, located at the very end of the manuscript, consists of nearly text-only pages, broken into short, dense paragraphs,
with each paragraph marked by a stylized drawing of a star in the left margin.
To give you another analogy, paging through this codex is like discovering a highly structured, beautifully formatted encyclopedia that has been transported from a parallel dimension.
The formatting is completely recognizable, the layout is logical, but upon closer inspection, every single empirical detail is fundamentally wrong or unrecognizable to our reality.
The plants are wrong, the stars are tethered, the plumbing defies physics.
Having analyzed the physical properties of the vellum and the internal taxonomy of these bizarre illustrations, we must now trace the physical journey of the manuscript across the centuries.
We are outlining the literal biography of the book from the Renaissance up to recent years, tracking exactly whose hands it passed through.
The early, verifiable provenance of the book points directly to the eccentric Bohemian court in Prague. The first documented transaction we can verify involves the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II.
Rudolf was famously obsessed with alchemy, the occult, and collecting rare oddities from across Europe.
According to historical correspondence, Rudolf purchased the manuscript for 600 ducats.
To give you an idea of that incredible cost, 600 ducats equates to over 2 kilograms of actual gold weight.
Over 2 kilograms of gold for a single book.
The purchase likely occurred around 1599, and the seller was possibly a prolific collector and dealer of esoteric manuscripts named Karl Weidmann.
We have physical corroboration of the manuscript's presence in Prague during this exact era. Under advanced ultraviolet light analysis, scholars identified a heavily faded, otherwise invisible signature at the very foot of the first page.
It belongs to Jacobus Horsicki de Tepenitz, who served as the head of Emperor Rudolf's extensive botanical gardens and also acted as one of his personal physicians.
It is hypothesized by historians that Rudolf, who died possessing immense debts to his staff, may have given the book to de Tepenitz as partial payment.
From the imperial court, the book moved into the hands of an alchemist in Prague named Georg Beresch.
Beresch is a pivotal figure in this biography because he represents the first recorded person trying to solve the mystery.
He was completely baffled by the manuscript. He explicitly referred to it as a useless sphinx that was merely taking up space in his library, mocking his inability to read it.
Beresch was well aware of the renowned Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, who resided at the Collegio Romano in Rome.
Kircher was famous throughout Europe at the time for claiming to have deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs, though we now know his translations were entirely incorrect.
Desperate for a translation of his frustrating Sphinx, Beresch sent a letter to Kircher in 1639. He included hand-copied samples of the unknown script.
This 1639 letter is incredibly important. It is the earliest known, independently verified written mention of the manuscript's existence.
Beresch eventually died, and the manuscript was inherited by his close friend Jan Marek Marci, who was the esteemed rector of Charles University in Prague.
Marci subsequently decided to send the actual physical manuscript to Athanasius Kircher in Rome.
He included a highly detailed cover letter, written in Latin, which was dated August 19, 1665 or 1666. That specific cover letter remained physically attached to the manuscript for centuries, traveling with it into Italy.
The manuscript arrived safely at the Collegio Romano, and then it essentially vanished completely from the historical record for over 2 centuries.
It entered a long period of undisturbed dormancy deep within the archives of the Jesuit library.
To understand its eventual rediscovery, we must look at the turbulent geopolitical context of Italy in the late 19th century. In 1870, the military troops of Victor Emmanuel II captured the city of Rome and annexed the Papal States, leading to the unification of Italy.
The newly formed Italian government initiated an aggressive policy of confiscating the vast properties and wealth of the church,
which directly threatened the immense, historically priceless library of the Collegio Romano. Anticipating this imminent state confiscation, the Jesuit faculty hastily orchestrated a massive secretive transfer of their most valuable books.
They realized they needed a legal loophole.
Exactly. They moved the books from the Central University Library into the private, personal libraries of the faculty members, because personal property was legally exempt from the state confiscation orders.
Athanasius Kircher's vast correspondence, including the mysterious manuscript, was transferred into the private library of Petrus Bex, who was the powerful head of the Jesuit order at the time.
The manuscript still bears Bex's personal bookplate today. These hidden collections were eventually relocated to the Villa Mondragone, a large, secure country palace near Rome, serving as a Jesuit headquarters.
Decades later, in 1912, the Society of Jesus found itself critically short of funds to maintain the massive Villa Mondragone. They decided to discreetly sell a portion of their hidden holdings.
This is when Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish rare book dealer with a very keen eye for historical value, enters the biography.
He negotiated a quiet purchase of 30 manuscripts from the Jesuits at the Villa Mondragone, and among them was the unreadable codex that now permanently bears his name in popular culture.
Wilfrid Voynich spent the entire remainder of his life exhibiting the book across the world, attempting to interest renowned scholars and cryptographers in deciphering the text.
Following his death, ownership of the artifact passed to his widow, Ethel Voynich, who was famously the author of the novel The Gadfly.
Upon her passing in 1960, the book was left to her close friend Anne Nill, who subsequently sold it in 1961 to the prominent antique rare book dealer Hans P. Krauss.
Krauss initially hoped to sell it for a massive profit, but he was ultimately unable to find a private buyer willing to pay his asking price for a book no one could read.
Consequently, in 1969, he donated the manuscript to Yale University, where it was accessioned into the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library as MS 408.
And its biography continues to be written by modern technology right up to the present day. You might wonder how we are still learning new things about an object that has been studied so intensely by so many people.
In 2024, the Beinecke Library authorized the release of highly advanced multispectral scans of selected pages.
These scans utilize varying wavelengths of light well beyond the visible human spectrum. They reveal incredibly subtle details in the parchment preparation, subsurface ink layers, and pigment applications that were entirely invisible to previous generations of researchers relying on the naked eye or basic microscopes.
Having established the exhaustive timeline of where the book has been and who has owned it, we must now rigorously interrogate the primary suspects regarding who actually created it.
This leads us into the complex, often highly debated web of authorship hypotheses.
For a very long time, the dominant theory, one heavily promoted by Wilfrid Voynich himself, who had a vested financial interest to its origin, was that the manuscript was the work of the brilliant 13th century English Franciscan friar and polymath Roger Bacon.
The entire logic behind the Roger Bacon theory rested heavily on that cover letter written by Jan Marek Marci in 1665.
Marci noted in the letter that a former tutor to the King of Bohemia believed Bacon was the original author. He further speculated that the English astrologer John Dee, who possessed a massive historical collection of Bacon's works, had sold it to Emperor Rudolph II for those 600 ducats.
Voynich desperately wanted to confirm this theory, as a previously unknown, highly encrypted, highly illustrated manuscript by a legendary figure like Roger Bacon would be virtually priceless on the rare book market.
However, the exact sciences eventually intervened to definitively dismantle this historical hypothesis.
Yes, the 2009 radiocarbon dating at the University of Arizona, which established the vellum's creation strictly between 1404 and 1438, entirely invalidated the Roger Bacon theory.
Bacon died in 1292. The physical material of the book, the animal skins themselves, were created more than a century after his death, rendering his authorship a strict chronological impossibility.
The spectacular failure of the Bacon theory fueled a counter-hypothesis, and that was the profound suspicion that Wilfrid Voynich himself forged the entire manuscript.
Voynich was a highly skilled, rare book dealer. He possessed the specialized knowledge of medieval manuscripts, the access to antique materials, and the massive financial motivation required to fabricate a supposedly lost work by Roger Bacon to enrich himself.
However, the scientific and historical data we now possess refutes the modern forgery hypothesis just as soundly as it refutes Bacon.
First, as noted by leading historians like Duffy, it is practically inconceivable that a forger working in 1912 could locate and acquire 14 or 15 entire, completely unused blank calfskins dating precisely to the early 15th century to construct a massive fake codex.
The radiocarbon dating perfectly matches the stylistic paleographic assessments and the chemical ink assessments of the object.
I would also point out the undeniable historical documentation.
The independent discovery in 1999 of Georg Baresh's original 1639 letter to Athanasius Kircher,
found misfiled deep within Kircher's vast archived correspondence in Rome. This provides absolute, incontrovertible proof that the manuscript existed and was already considered an unreadable, frustrating mystery nearly 300 years before Wilfrid Voynich was even born.
Other historical suspects have been proposed over the years. Some scholars pointed to the 15th century Italian engineer Giovanni Fontana, who is known to utilize cryptographic systems and create books featuring fantastical, complex illustrations.
However, analyzing Fontana's surviving works, we see that he relied on relatively simple substitution ciphers that absolutely do not match the profound statistical complexity of the unknown script.
Another highly specific theory proposed that the text is actually a 16th century Aztec herbal document written in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, created in colonial New Spain.
Proponents of this theory match the bizarre plant drawings to Mesoamerican species, but again, the physical evidence provides an absolute contradiction.
The vellum's strict early 15th century dating means the physical materials existed decades before Columbus even reached the Americas, let alone before the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire.
If we conclude that the author remains fundamentally unknown, we are left to interrogate the nature of the writing itself. We must explore the competing linguistic frameworks that attempt to explain what this text actually is.
Is it a hidden language, an unbreakable code, or a highly elaborate con? Let's examine the cryptographic theories first.
For decades, the greatest military cryptanalysts in the world, including the brilliant minds from Bletchley Park and the NSA who broke complex World War II codes, assumed the manuscript was a cipher.
They searched exhaustively for a substitution cipher where each unknown character simply corresponds to a hidden letter in a known European language.
But traditional substitution ciphers uniformly fail here. As we discussed earlier regarding the extremely low entropy, the distribution of letter frequencies in the manuscript does not resemble the distribution found in any known human language.
If you apply a simple substitution, the resulting text remains statistically impossible as a language.
Furthermore, the very small number of distinct character shapes used in the manuscript also rules out more complex homophonic ciphers or nomenclators, which require much larger, expansive cipher alphabets to function effectively.
However, the script is full of highly repetitive, tightly grouped shapes. You often see combinations that look like a word repeating over and over with minor variations.
This suggests the distinct possibility of a verbose cipher.
For you to understand a verbose cipher, imagine you want to hide the letter A. Instead of replacing it with a single symbol, you artificially expand it and encipher it into a larger group of fake letters to obscure the message.
So A becomes XDB, becomes XQZ, and so on. This specific approach remains a major focus of current cryptographic research.
For instance, a 2025 study detailed a rigorous proof-of-concept verbose substitution system called the Naibi cipher.
The researcher demonstrated that a verbose cipher, built using historically accurate, viable 15th century methods, could successfully encode standard Latin or Italian text into a complex ciphertext that heavily mimics the known statistical properties of the unreadable manuscript.
While the study explicitly states it is only a conceptual model and not the actual definitive solution to the book, it proves that a highly complex cipher remains a mathematically viable hypothesis.
Another fascinating branch of cryptography suggests steganography. Steganography is the practice of hiding a meaningful message within an otherwise completely meaningless text or image. It is about camouflage rather than strict encryption.
Under this theory, the vast majority of the 38,000 words in the manuscript are intentional gibberish, serving only as a massive visual smokescreen to conceal a much shorter actual message.
The true text might be hidden in the second letter of every fourth word, or encoded in the specific lengths and angles of the pen strokes themselves.
Alternatively, the message could theoretically be extracted using a cardon grill.
A cardon grill is a physical piece of parchment with specific cutouts that, when placed perfectly over the page, reveals only the meaningful words while hiding the rest.
The fundamental difficulty with steganographic theories is that they are inherently unfalsifiable. Without knowing the exact dimensions of the specific grill or the precise, hidden rule of extraction, you cannot mathematically disprove the existence of a hidden message.
Moving away from codes entirely, we must consider the natural language hypotheses. This proposes that the script is simply a unique phonetic alphabet invented to record a spoken language that previously lacked a writing system.
The linguistic statistical analysis we discussed earlier, the strict adherence to Zipf's law, and the low word entropy strongly supports the hypothesis that the text contains the internal structures of a natural language.
Some linguists have proposed it might be a Sino-Tibetan language, where morphemes generally consist of a single syllable, which could expertly explain the short, highly rigid word structures observed in the manuscript.
Furthermore, a 2023 study utilizing advanced deep learning computational methods analyzed the manuscript against a massive global sample of historical scripts.
And that study suggested the strongest structural resemblance was to Kotki, a specialized script used by specific mercantile communities in South Asia.
Alternatively, there is the constructed language theory. This suggests the text is an artificially engineered philosophical language, designed systematically to categorize all human knowledge logically, rather than an organically evolved spoken tongue.
The primary academic challenge to the constructed language theory is severe historical anachronism. The concept of creating a synthetic, universal philosophical language, where categories of meaning are neatly subdivided by specific prefixes and suffixes, was championed by intellectual figures like John Wilkins in 1668.
That is over 2 centuries after the carbon dating of the vellum.
It would require the manuscript's author to have independently invented the entire conceptual framework of philosophical languages, hundreds of years before the concept appeared anywhere else in European intellectual history.
This brings us to the final, and perhaps most provocative, set of theories. The hoax and glossolalia hypotheses. These theories posit that the text has no inherent linguistic or cryptographic meaning whatsoever.
The hoax hypothesis argues that the manuscript was a deliberate, incredibly elaborate forgery created in the early 15th century specifically to be sold for a massive profit to a wealthy, gullible collector of esoterica.
Exactly the type of historical transaction we see later, with Emperor Rudolf II paying 600 ducats for it.
But to explain how a medieval forger could generate 38,000 words of highly structured, statistically consistent gibberish without making obvious cognitive mistakes, researchers like Gordon Rugg proposed a low-tech generation method.
It is essentially a medieval version of a fill-in-the-blank word game. Rugg demonstrated that by using a large physical table filled with word prefixes, midfixes, and suffixes, combined with a perforated paper overlay that acts as an algorithm, a single person could rapidly generate thousands of words that look superficially and statistically like the unreadable text.
And this avenue of research has yielded incredibly robust computational backing in recent years. In 2019, researchers Torsten Timm and Andreas Schinner published extensive computational models demonstrating that a process of self-citation.
A process where a medieval scribe simply copies and slightly modifies meaningless words they have just written earlier on the same page.
Can successfully reproduce many of the highly complex statistical characteristics of the manuscript.
Furthermore, a fascinating 2022 study by researchers at Yale University analyzed texts produced by modern human participants who were explicitly instructed to write absolute gibberish.
The statistical properties of that intentionally meaningless human test proved to be highly non-random and remarkably identical to the structural quirks of the unknown script. The human brain, it seems, struggles to produce true randomness.
Which leads directly to the related psychological theory of glossolalia, commonly known as speaking in tongues, but applied to writing.
Glossolalia occurs when an individual in a trance, an altered psychological state, or suffering from a neurological condition feels deeply compelled to produce rapid, fluent, but semantically meaningless vocalizations or writing.
Researchers Jerry Kennedy and Rob Churchill compared the highly repetitive, almost hallucinatory visual elements of the manuscript. the endless streams of stars and the repetitive female figures trapped in the intricate plumbing networks, to the documented, severe migraine-induced visions of the medieval mystic Hildegard von Bingen.
They theorized the manuscript could be a genuine artifact of outsider art, the product of an intense psychological compulsion to record internal visions using a spontaneously invented, meaningless script.
Regardless of whether it is an unbreakable code, a lost language, or an elaborate medieval hoax, the manuscript has generated a vast, densely populated graveyard of decipherment claims.
For over a century, brilliant academics, engineers, and amateur cryptographers have confidently announced to the world that they alone have cracked the code.
And every single time, without fail, their claims have completely collapsed under rigorous peer review.
The earliest major internationally publicized claim occurred in 1921 by William Romain Newbold, a highly respected professor at the University of Pennsylvania.
Newbold proposed an incredibly elaborate micrography hypothesis. He claimed that the large, visible letters of the manuscript were merely meaningless containers.
The actual message, he argued passionately, was written in microscopic Greek shorthand, hidden within the very pen strokes themselves, visible only under extreme high magnification.
Newbold claimed he had translated entire paragraphs detailing microscopic biology and advanced astronomical discoveries far ahead of their time.
But the reality of his decipherment was completely dismantled a decade later by John Matthews Manley.
Manley demonstrated conclusively that Newbold was not seeing microscopic shorthand at all.
He was simply observing the natural microscopic artifacts of the iron gall ink cracking and flaking as it dried on the rough, uneven surface of the vellum over centuries.
Newbold was suffering from a classic, tragic case of pareidolia, identifying complex, meaningful patterns in completely random noise.
Furthermore, Newbold's incredibly complex translation method allowed him to arbitrarily rearrange the supposed microscopic letters until they formed words that made sense to him, rendering the entire system entirely subjective and scientifically useless. He found exactly what he wanted to find.
This exact pattern of highly subjective translation methods has repeated itself endlessly throughout the decades. There was John Stojko's 1978 claim that the text was a vowelless form of Ukrainian, which failed entirely because the resulting translation had absolutely no logical connection to the accompanying botanical illustrations.
There was Greg Kondrach's 2017 computational linguistics claim that the text was Hebrew written in alphagrams, alphabetically ordered anagrams. The academic community firmly rejected the methodology as mathematically flawed.
In 2017, television writer Nicholas Gibbs published a widely circulated claim that the manuscript was an idiosyncratically abbreviated Latin guide to women's health.
And that particular claim was instantly and thoroughly dismantled by experts like Lisa Fagan-Davis, who pointed out that Gibbs's proposed decipherment resulted in Latin sentences that were grammatically nonsensical and historically inaccurate.
Then we have the complex case of Ahmed Ardish, an electrical engineer who claimed up to the present day that the text is written in a phonetic variety of Old Turkic. He argued that the author spelled out words exactly as they sounded phonetically.
His team claimed to have translated hundreds of words by matching these phonetic Old Turkic roots to the illustrations. However, his findings were universally rejected by academic journals, and linguists heavily criticized the methodology as relying on extreme linguistic flexibility to force words to fit the pictures.
Perhaps the most prominent recent controversy involves Gerard Cheshire, a biology research assistant at the University of Bristol. In 2019, Cheshire claimed he had translated the manuscript in just 2 weeks, declaring it to be the only known surviving text of a calligraphic Proto-Romance language, compiled by Dominican nuns.
But again, we see the exact same critical flaw in the methodology. Reviewers noted the deep, inescapable circular logic inherent in Cheshire's approach.
As critics meticulously explained, he would look at an illustration, formulate a highly subjective assumption about what the drawing depicted, and then search through dozens of different medieval Romance language dictionaries until he found a word that loosely matched the glyphs on the page.
By cherry-picking words from multiple different languages to fit a preconceived notion of the drawing, the translation process is entirely aspirational. It is not a translation. It is an exercise in creative writing driven by pareidolia.
The academic backlash was so severe that the University of Bristol officially retracted their support and removed all references to his claims from their public platforms.
This brings us to a crucial final observation. What is truly fascinating here is what this continuous, centuries-long failure reveals about us as human beings.
Consider what it means for modern society, armed with the most advanced artificial intelligence, deep learning algorithms, supercomputers, and multispectral imaging, to remain completely defeated by a physical book constructed from calfskin and ground minerals over 600 years ago.
This artifact continues to perfectly resist our profound, innate human need for structural resolution. Perhaps the manuscript's true enduring purpose is not to be read at all, but to act as a permanent, unbreakable mirror.
It reflects the specific biases, the desperate hopes, and the cognitive pareidolia of whoever is currently looking at it, continuously generating meaning entirely from the minds of the observers.
It is a remarkable concept to consider.
Thanks for listening.